The views expressed by the host on this program make more sense than anything anybody else out there happens to be saying. And that's because the views expressed by the host on this program are the result of a daily, relentless, unstoppable pursuit of the truth. And then we find it. And we do not run from it. We shout it and we proclaim it. And this causes people to lose their minds. Happy to be with you folks. Happy to have you here. The telephone number, if you want to be on the program, is 800-282-2882. And the email address, lrushbo@eibnet.com. Daily Caller. Americans want the government to stop acting like their mother. Look, I want a little brief exception. Mothers are not half as bad as the government. But I nevertheless get the point here. Americans are fed up with the government banning everything. That's the impetus here of the poll. It's a Reason Magazine RUPE, R-U-P-E poll. Americans do not want the government to ban trans fats. They don't want them to ban e-cigarettes. They don't want them to ban online poker. They don't want them to ban violent video games or genetic testing kits. They don't want them to ban light bulbs. According to this poll, and I happen to believe it, many Americans are becoming frustrated with the government's growing involvement in what they believe should be their personal decisions. For one thing, they do not want the government to be their personal nutritionist. The poll found that 71% of Americans oppose the FDA's proposed ban on trans fats, for example. Now, my guess is that most people don't know what a trans fat is, but they do know that they want the government involved in it. A large majority, 76%, said the government should not be able to prohibit the sale of beverages with large amounts of caffeine. They don't like the idea of banning something larger than 16 ounces. They just don't like it. It's like I said in the previous hour, we've had a couple of callers recently that have buttressed this point. I think that there is a groundswell of opposition to big government taking place all over the country. It's not reported on. It's not reflected. It's not in the daily media narrative, of course. It never would be. It's not part of the daily soap opera. In fact, it's just the opposite. If you pay attention to media, all you're going to learn is that people want to be helpless. They are helpless, and they're totally content with the government providing for them, giving them things, protecting them, taking care of them. And, of course, the people who are enriched and empowered by doing this are also going to be supportive of it. But there's a groundswell of opposition to this. The problem is that it isn't represented by anybody officially. That remains the problem. We've got this newfangled budget here that has just passed the House of Representatives. It's still kind of dicey what's going to happen to this in the Senate. And by the way, I just want to remind you, on January 1st, I still don't believe this. And while I believe it, I can't tell you how frustrated I am. The Republican Party made this happen. George W. Bush signed this law in 2007 that bans the incandescent light bulb based on a hoax. The incandescent light bulb is causing global warming as the ice sheets in both the Arctic and Antarctic regions expand. There isn't any warming going on anywhere. Quite the opposite is the truth. Record cold is being set in places all over the world. Snow for the first time in 100 years in Cairo. If I didn't know better, I'd say that Gore was scheduled to speak that day on global warming. It's what usually happens. Incandescent light bulbs cause global warming. 40 and 60-watt bulbs. January 1st, you're going to be illegal. You're going to be in violation of the law if you buy them. It's just unbelievable. And their replacement, these silly compact fluorescents, are dangerous. They got mercury in them. They're not nearly as good. And Republicans made this happen. They acquiesced. I mentioned earlier the Washington Times had an editorial, unsigned editorial. The GOP retreats into fear. Last week I speculated numerous times because I'm asked constantly, Rush, what's wrong with the Republicans? And I've told you that I think they're suffering from shock, post-traumatic stress disorder, government shutdown. They're just scared. They're frightened of the media. Had people call here. They're not. Rush, they're not frightened. They're not scared of anything. They agree with it. They're all in on it. And I know there's a body of thought that agrees with that, and it's hard to refute. You look at this budget deal that Paul Ryan came up with. It comes out of a Republican Congress. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't jibe with any of the thinking of the base of the Republican Party. It establishes funding for Obamacare. Jeff Sessions pointed out, he was on Levin's show on Friday, I think. Jeff Sessions pointed out that the budget has a mechanism in it to make tax increases easier than ever in the Senate with just 51 votes. Republicans doing this. This is a Republican budget. And so when people call here and say to me, Rush, they're not scared. They're all in. I can understand the sentiment. Now, let me share with you this Washington Times editorial. With frightened Republicans scattering like bunny rabbits at the sound of distant thunder, a job-killing minimum wage increase is probably inevitable. Only 63 House Republicans voted to maintain the budgetary discipline that prevented Obama from breaking the budget into even tinier pieces. The early unconditional surrender in the House sends a message that these congressmen will throw good policy overboard at the first sign their reelection could be imperiled. The Republican cynicism stands proud and naked. It's enough to make a speaker cry. With a bully pulpit backed up by friends in the media, the president owns the agenda in Washington. If he can fool Republicans into voting for a tax and spending increase in return for gossamer spending reductions to take place someday, maybe in a future decade when many of the congressmen voting for it will be dead anyway, there's no limit to what he can do. Taking his case to Twitter, Mr. Obama said, here's how, listen to this now. This is so convoluted, it defies all economic theory, common sense, and logic. But this is what Obama said. Here's how to improve our economy, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, raise the minimum wage. Folks, we have decades of data, metadata, big data, regular data, infinitesimal data. We've got decades of data. Raising a minimum wage does not raise the job level. It does not increase the number of jobs. Raising the minimum wage does not raise the standard of living. Raising the minimum wage doesn't have one significant economic benefit. And yet, here's Obama. Here's how to improve our economy, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, raise the minimum wage. And then he said a $2.85 an hour increase in the federal minimum wage would create $32.6 billion in new wealth and 140,000 new jobs. Okay, if mandating salary increases is what it takes to create wealth, then why not raise the minimum wage to $28.50 and create 1,400,000 new jobs? The minimum wage and arbitrary salary increase creates wealth? Ladies and gentlemen, the government cannot and does not create wealth. Government destroys wealth by taking it and moving it around, by redistributing it. Government doesn't create wealth. Where's the money going to come from to raise the minimum wage, for example? Where is the corresponding increase in productivity that generates that money? There isn't any. Why does somebody say that an entry-level job is worth what Obama wants it to be? Where's the economics behind it? There isn't any. There's just a cockamamie faculty lounge theory here that is not borne out by any data, any logic, or any economic sense. It's like my old suggestion of how to argue with somebody who supports the minimum wage. They'll say to you, well, we need to raise it, Rush, $2 an hour. Okay, fine. What's that make it? Well, let's see, $2 an hour. Let's just say it'll round it off. Let's say it makes it $10 an hour. Okay, well, why not make it $12 an hour? Whoa, okay, you go for that? Sure. Okay, well, if you let's make them $15 an hour. Whoa, Rush, what's happening to you? You'd support $15? Absolutely. What about you? Well, I'm all in. I said, fine. Well, let's make it 20. Really, Rush? You'd support a minimum wage at $20 an hour? Why not? Why stop? Okay, 20, that's great. Boy, we're really creating all the... Okay, well, let's get serious here. Let's make it $40 an hour. Well, I don't know, Rush. Why not? What's wrong with $40 an hour? Well, at some point, even advocates will realize, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And at that point, you've got them. And you say, it doesn't make any sense at any level because it's artificial. It's unreal. It's not related to anything. There's no corresponding to productivity that generates that money. Raise the minimum wage from who? Who's got it? Well, everybody knows, Mr. Limbaugh, those businesses are just hoarding money in the bank or in the back room. They've got money. They're just the owner. He's just keeping it for himself. It's time he shared it with his workers who are making him. He wouldn't be where he is without his workers. He ought to give the money to his workers. They're the ones responsible for the owner being where he is. Oh, okay. So the owner just has a stash back there, right? And he's hoarding it, and it's unfair. And so you want the government to go in there with their jackbooted thugs and dip into the safe or the box or the strong, but wherever this owner's hoarding his money and has taken enough out to give his workers an additional $2 minimum wage increase. That's exactly right. So, first place, the owner doesn't have the money. In the second place, that's not how economics works. There has to be something behind the increase. There's got to be some level of productivity generating the money. The money just doesn't come out of thin air. Then you get right down to it, again, the same old thing. The minimum wage is not about economics or standard of living or any of that. It's just a leftist prop. But the point is, here you've got Obama out claiming, and Pelosi too, claiming that raising the minimum wage or unemployment benefits equal economic growth. It's just as nonsensical as them believing the stimulus was going to stimulate the economy. It was impossible for it to. There was no economic way to stimulate the economy by simply shifting the money around. If you're going to pump, if you're the federal government, you're going to pump $1 trillion into the economy, where do you get it? You get it from the very economy you're going to put it back into. It's a net wash. We're going to stimulate the economy. We're going to roads and bridges and clean air, clean water, and doctors and nurses. We're going to rebuild schools and everything. Okay, good. That sounds wonderful. We're going to get the money. Government. Oh, so the government is going to put $1 trillion in there. It's not in there right now. That's right. Well, where is that $1 trillion? Well, we don't really have it. That's right. You don't really have it. We don't have $1 trillion sitting around not doing it. We're in debt $17 trillion minimum. But yet we're going to find $1 trillion that's not being used? $1 trillion that's just sitting idle somewhere? And we're going to... Now, if you could do that, if you could find $17 trillion or $1 trillion that's sitting idle and not doing, and then you pump that in, then maybe for a short time you can artificially stimulate the economy. But if you're just going to first take $1 trillion out of the economy when nobody's looking, and then put it back in and claim you're stimulating, you're doing nothing but replacing what you took in the first place. There is no, it's the same thing with a minimum wage. It isn't new money. It's being taken from somebody. Now, why can't the Republicans stand up and say this? Are they afraid to? Do they not believe it? Do they not want to cause trouble? Are they afraid it would lead to a government shutdown? Whatever. The Washington Times thinks that they're retreating into fear. They think they're just scared stiff. They're afraid to stand up for anything they believe in because they're going to get criticized because it might lead to government shutdown or what have you. But look, before we go to the break, here's another story that indicates to me there's all kinds of Tea Party effervescence going on out there that the Inside-the-Beltway crowd, both parties, is missing and is unaware that it's happening. The signs are everywhere. Colorado, these two Democrats that were recalled because of their anti-gun legislation. And by the way, the latest school shooting in Colorado, it's another kid admittedly inspired by socialists, inspired by what he's heard about the inequities of our society, and upset about it and deciding to pick up a gun and do something about it. The media doesn't want you to know this, but practically every one of these young kids shooting up schools is inspired by something to do with leftism, socialism, what have you. Every one of them is. That's why you don't hear about it anymore. When they can't tie them to the Tea Party, you don't hear about it anymore. You hear the mental health explanation. Well, what mental health problem? Liberalism, guaranteed is what's causing this. But that's another subject. Hundreds turn out to support the cake shop owner who refused to make a cake for a same-sex wedding. I have details coming up. Don't go away.